So I'm here with Maura Thomas, and I've never. Hi, Maura. How are you doing? First of all,
I'm well. Thanks for having me on, Anthony.
very very glad to have you. So how did you arrive at the point in your career where you are now the most widely cited authority on attention management? Like, how do you get to that point?
It's been a journey. I've had my business for 17 years, and before that, I was also in the productivity industry. But 17 years teaching people productivity and speaking about productivity and studying the field of productivity and what works for people. And around 2009, I started to realize people kept saying, when I spoke about productivity, people would say, oh, like time management. And I just kept realizing you can't manage time, number one. And managing time means I make an appointment with myself on my calendar. But the first person we're going to break an appointment with is ourselves. So if this is our magic formula, make an appointment with yourself, like that is not that we need something new. And not having enough time is not our problem. Every person gets the same amount of time, right? The problem that we have today in the 21st century is distraction. And so you can't solve a distraction problem by trying to manage time. You have to manage attention. And so, this is the sort of thoughts that were forming in my head around 2009. And then I started to write about them. And then I was approached to write my first book. And that came out in 2012. I first started blogging, and then my book came out in 2012. And the first few chapters of my book were about it. And then I was invited to do a TEDx talk on it. And then I wrote a second book that had sort of that theme throughout. And I started writing for all kinds of outlets.
Let me see if I can track this timeline. You sounds like you were really ahead of your time, because 2009, I think, is just 2 years after Facebook and the iPhone really hit the marketplace. So yeah, you really were sort of a front runner in this thought area. It sounds like. I mean, who else was thinking about the impacts of these kinds of technologies at that point?
Yeah. So there was a book. There were some books out. There was a book called The Attention Economy. I think businesses caught on to this, right? We need to get the attention of our audience and of our prospects, of our target market. But I think not too many people at the time were thinking about, if businesses are working so hard to get our attention, what does that mean for us and for our ability to, as I say it, to live a life of choice rather than a life of reaction?
Yeah, it really has become. Every day we're on social media, it feels like we're in a transaction. Just using social media as an example, but we're not really it's not really transparent, right? We're exchanging our attention for something. I'm not really quite sure what we're getting out of it, but
Or revenue Facebook.
there's no checkout. We don't really realize what we're doing sometimes.
No, so what we are exchanging our attention for is revenue for Facebook.
Oh my goodness, yeah.
Our attention is the product that Facebook sells.
But I guess my question is, what are we getting out of it? What are we being paid for our attention?
Yeah, I think we're getting a false sense of connection. The research is showing a false sense of connection, and also a habit of distraction, because these sites are manipulating our, holding the likes so that so that intermittent reinforcement becomes a part of it, and just doing all of these things to keep us engaged at the expense of anything else, because it's their revenue model depends on their ability to keep us on their site. And, Facebook isn't the only one. They all do. Yeah.
So, how did we get to this point where, I guess societally, we really, it seems like we really undervalue our attention. Like, how did we get to this point? Was there a inflection point or a change in technology where you kind of see historically we just stopped caring as much, or stopped protecting our attention to the degree that we should?
I don't think it was. I don't actually think it's that we are undervaluing our attention. I think that we are overvaluing our distractions.
Very nice.
And right. And I think that this whole idea of, what's happening and FOMO and I need to do some research on this. A journalist quoted this to me that somebody else said, and so I have to find out who it was, and I'm sorry that I don't know right now. But they called it a communication debt, that we're always in communication debt. And whoever said that, I'm sorry that I don't know your name right now, but I will find out, because I think it's a great phrase, because there's always, right, those little numbers, right? Oh, I owe 3 text messages and I have 4 voicemails, and I owe 3, comments on Facebook and 2 connections on LinkedIn and 4 DMs on Twitter, and right. And it's always that we're always behind in our communication. And so it feels like we have to work all day just to stay out of that debt. But the truth is, many of those communications, number one, are not things that we owe other people. And number two, aren't even that important. It's certainly not important enough for us to, some of them are. If somebody, leaves you a voicemail, you can't ignore it forever. But even, even text messages, I feel like we have turned into this society where just because somebody sends us a message, I can't tell you how many times I've been asked, do you know of a service besides the new one now that Apple does that says I'm driving, when you text somebody and they get an auto response on text that says I'm driving? People would ask me, do you know of an autoresponder for text? And that question drives me crazy, because doesn't the fact that I'm not getting back to you right now tell you that I can't get back to you right now?
Yeah, the silence is the auto response.
Exactly. And so the auto response just perpetuates this idea that I owe you a response immediately. Nobody owes anybody a response immediately. And so, so I think we're just, back to your original question, we are just overvaluing the distractions.
So before we move forward, I want to sort of touch on some topics that you covered in your book, which was a great read, by the way. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, you talk about sort of why it's important to. I think it was 4 reasons, or I think it was 4 phases of thinking. I don't remember exactly how you framed it.
Yeah, 4 quadrants of attention.
Right, and there's 2 areas in particular that I thought were sort of showed why it's important to rid ourselves of distraction, or at least focus our attention or protect our attention. And, can you talk a little bit about, I think I'm referring to them properly, to the states of flow and daydreaming? Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. So daydreaming, so the quadrants were on the axes of how much effort you have to put in and how much control you have over your attention. And so, or how attentive you are. Right. And so, daydreaming to me actually requires some effort to get to that point, because we have lost what I call the in-between moments where daydreaming used to happen, right? Those moments of sitting in a stoplight, riding an elevator, waiting in line, walking across the parking lot, right? All of those little moments we used to have that where our mind would just wander and do its own thing. And I think it's in the book Influencer by Carrie Patterson, not the one by Robert Cialdini, which is also a great one, but the Carrie Patterson book. I think that's the book where he talks about the elephant and the rider, right? And so the elephant is your brain and the rider is your consciousness. And so if the rider gets off the elephant, right, if your consciousness just sort of gets out of the way and lets your brain do its thing, the brain, like the elephant, is a very powerful thing. And when we just get off and let it do its own thing, let our mind just wander and daydream, that's when insights happen, right? That's because you can't say to yourself, I will now have an insight.
Right.
Right? I will now solve that problem, right? You can't command your brain like that. That's when the learning happens. That's when the insights happen. But we've lost those in-between moments, because now in any positive activity, we feel like I could knock out some of that debt, right? I could clear some of those notifications. I could read those text messages. I could clear those Facebook notifications or whatever it is. And so I think it takes effort to...
You're reminding me of the movie, did you watch Inception, that Chris Nolan movie with the All right. It's the whole premise. It's a sci-fi movie about sort of invading people's dreams, right? Actual dreams, right? But the
Yeah.
notion is that our brains are actually much more powerful in a dream state, in a slightly below conscious state, than when we're actively thinking. So I don't know. For whatever reason, what you just said kind of reminded me of that.
It's ringing a bell. I might have seen that movie.
But you're right. You're totally right. I mean, so the only time that I can think of where the majority of people will actually allow their mind to wander is if you're on an airplane without Wi-Fi. Everything else, you're whipping your phone out,
Not even then. I mean, how many people do you say playing games, and now you have the seat back
Oh, that's right.
TVs,
Forgot how it
and they
was.
think on them, and they have TVs. I mean, there's really, for most people, Ned Hallowell talks about that we don't like to stare into the abyss, right? We don't like, people find that reflection, that internal thinking time to be uncomfortable. And so we will do anything to avoid it. Did you see that study about the people in the room with the machine that would shock them?
It's ringing a bell, but please
Yeah.
refresh our memory. Yeah.
So there's apparently, and I hope I'm quoting the study right because I'm doing it from memory now, but that people were put in a room with nothing in the room, no doors, no windows, just a table and a chair, nothing else. The only thing in the room was a machine that would deliver an electrical shock.
Right.
Right? And they told the people that you don't want to mess with that. That will hurt. Right? But there was nothing else in the room, and some huge percentage of the people, rather than just sit quietly, they were asked to just sit quietly and please not sleep, I guess. But because there was nothing else to do, 80-something% of the people shocked themselves. And not just once, but multiple times.
For some reason, I'm tying this to prison reform and whether or not solitary confinement is a humane practice. If that's what we as humans would rather do than be alone with our thoughts.
Well, yeah, I mean, solitary confinement is extended periods of time. I think we all need some quiet time. And in fact, I think that we could all do with some more quiet time to just be instead of to have to do solitary confinement. Whole different story.
So would you say, do you think perhaps there seems to be a trend lately, this whole meditation trend? There's apps to support it and a lot of books out, it seems, on I guess teaching you how to meditate. Do you see that as a sort of counterforce to the forces that are pushing us out of our daydream states, perhaps?
I do. I think that that getting outside and taking downtime and meditation and yoga and mindful breathing and all of these things are sort of having another moment now. And I do think that that's a backlash to our insanely crazy, frazzled lifestyles.
So then on the other end of the opposite quadrant of the spectrum of sort of free-form thinking, which is the daydream state we just talked about, we have the more intense, focused thinking end of the spectrum. Yeah, am I getting that right? The flow state.
Well, there's actually two. So there's focused and mindful, which is another state, which also takes effort, right, to stay focused. But once you stay focused, once you are able to control your attention for an extended period of time, and you get what I call this sort of brain power momentum behind you, right? You get your head really into whatever you're doing. That's when you might get lucky enough to tip into flow. And flow is effortless. You don't need any. Once you're in flow, it's just total immersion. Mm-hmm. In the task at hand. But flow is not something that you can command, right? I will now be in flow, right? That doesn't work. You have to work hard to stay focused. And then if you do, your brain might actually reward you by tipping you into flow.
So for anyone who doesn't know, this term was coined by, I think it was a Swedish sociologist. Is that right? Am I getting that right?
A Hungarian psychologist. A Hungarian psychologist, his name, and I believe I'm saying it right, his name is Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, and he's out of the University of Chicago, I believe. Hungarian born, but in the U.S. And yes, his book is called Flow, the Psychology. I'm looking because I think I have it I'm sure I have it on the bookshelf right there. Flow, the Psychology of Optimal Performance. And the idea is that once we are in this flow state, our highest and best self comes out. And it's a documented psychological state where the part of your brain that recognizes your yourself in time and space, that says, I'm in this room and it's a little chilly in here and my back kind of hurts and this chair's hard, or all of those things. I wonder what time it is, all that kind of stuff. All of that part of your brain disengages, and it's just total immersion.
Yeah, the way I think of it at least, is you lose track of time. Like you're just an hour flies by because you were just jamming out the work or whatever you were focused on. It could be art. Doesn't have to be work. It could be anything that requires intense focus. Yeah.
Totally.
Yeah.
Yep.
It could be video games. Sorry, that's not a great example, but that does happen as well.
Sure. I mean, it could be art. It could be your hobby. It could be a task. It could be an experience, right? In a movie, reading a book. Yeah, it could be any of those things.
So I mean, the reason I brought those two things up were, those, to me at least, those were the two really valuable states that we are sort of chipping away at the more we give in to these distractions. It feels like is kind of one of the points. Yeah.
For sure. There's no flow in the presence of distraction.
So one of the tips that you give that I really love, that I've been thinking a lot about, is to focus more on things with depth than shallow experience. And the example you give is read more books and fewer blog posts, or even to the other end of that spectrum, tweets, I guess, right? Can you give some more examples of where some depth would be, or consuming your information with greater depth would help you minimize distraction, or just give you more of that focused attention, let's call it, yeah?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right. It's a whole spectrum of depth versus nuance. But I mean, we read the headline and maybe skim the subheads instead of actually reading the article. A lot of us are drawn more to a listicle type. You see those everywhere. Top 10 reasons why you should control your attention, right? Or whatever. They're more clickbaity than, a nuanced deep dive article. Now every article says at the top, it's a 2-minute read, or it's a 7-minute read, or it's a 10-minute read. If we're going to watch a video, I bet anybody who goes to watch this video of us on YouTube is going to go to the bottom right-hand corner and say, how long is it? Before they decide if they're going to watch it, right? And so it turns out that we know just the tiniest bit about a breathtaking number of things. And we fail to take a really nuanced approach, a deep dive on any of them. In fact, I really feel like that's the problem with our politics today. Yeah,
I was about to bring it there, but I wasn't sure if I should.
Well, I mean, we don't have to go deep into the partisanship, but it's, we can't solve difficult problems with sound bites and campaign slogans.
Well, that statement right there seems like it's been going on for decades, actually. I mean, campaign slogans really running the public discourse. But yeah, it does seem more acute lately. It certainly does. Yeah.
For sure. And part of the problem is that being constantly distracted chips away not only at our attention span, but it also chips away at our patience. I ask audiences all over the country, all over the world, do you feel less patient than you used to? Who feels less patient than they used to? And every hand goes up. And it's because that we're so used to the constant distraction that when we don't get a distraction, we're impatient. And so now we don't take the time to explore a thoughtfully nuanced argument or exploration of a subject. And we just want, give me the highlights, give me the bullet points.
So this is a very personal question for my household, because I have more of an entrepreneurial background, and my wife has more of a traditional sort of a corporate job, let's call it. So my question to you is, in your experience lecturing, coaching, and just meeting all these people out there as you discuss these topics, who do you find more tethered to their emails, their notifications, to their distractions? Is it entrepreneurs, or is it folks who work in a more corporate or institutional environment? Or have you noticed the difference? Yeah.
Yeah. If those are the two options, I think I I think so. My work appeals. I mean, it certainly has appeal for other people, but I think primarily my audience is professionals who work mostly in an office and use computing devices to do their job, right? And so that describes corporate professionals and also sort of, specialist lawyers, accountants, those kinds of things, but and certainly entrepreneurs as well.
Okay. So that's a wash. Great. So there's this great author, perhaps you've heard of him, Nicholas Nassim Taleb. He has a couple of books out. But one of the things he said recently that struck me was that, I hope I'm paraphrasing this succinctly, but level 1 thinking is essentially to have gatekeepers to protect your time and attention from various distractions and so forth. But level 2 is to live your life in such a way that you don't need a gatekeeper, right? You don't need that administrative assistant or scheduler or coordinator to keep distractions out, because you've crafted a lifestyle or a business where you're only interacting with folks who you actually want to spend time with, and you don't need buffers. Have you heard of that, or do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, it reminds me of an article I wrote. I wrote a response to an article in the New York Times about about the benefits of unplugging, and the author of the article was talking about how he had to go to his cabin in the Catskills in order to get any work done. And I was like, dude, I mean, disconnect your internet. It's fine. Like, you have total control. And that's one of the primary things that I hope people get out of the book, is that they can be empowered. You have the power to control your attention. You can't control time in terms of you can't slow it down. You can't get more of it. You can't bend it to your will in any way. But you can be completely empowered over your own attention. And you can decide if it gets stolen. You can decide what you allow to get your attention. You have total control, but only if you exert that control. And what I find is that most people just don't exert that control. We cede control to our technology and other people.
So the book launched September 9th. Do I have that date right?
It did, yes.
Very good, very good. Congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you. I have a copy of here on the shelf.
Awesome.
Yes, attention management, how to create success and gain productivity every day. And it's a really quick read, as you probably experienced. Yeah.
So how else do you help folks? I noticed that you do speaking engagements, and do you provide, I guess, trainings in company environments, or what is your offerings, I guess?
Sure. Yeah, I do speaking engagements at industry conferences and various events. I also do company annual meeting kind of keynotes and things like that. And I do a lot of corporate trainings inside organizations where the department or the team or sometimes the entire organization gets together and goes through training on what I call my empowered productivity system, which is a workflow management system that has a foundation in attention management.
So in the weeks that follow a book launch for me, I'm also an author.
Yeah.
I feel like a sort of an itchiness to move on to the next thing. So are you experiencing that at all? What's next for you?
Look, what you're talking about is your impatience and your challenge with being present, Anthony. That should tell you something.
Guilty.
So I'm sorry, your question was what's next for me?
Yeah. What are you sinking your teeth into next?
I think my next thing is going to be the second edition of my first book, which came out in 2012. It's called Personal Productivity Secrets. And that book really outlines my whole empowered productivity system. But as you can imagine, it has evolved quite a lot since 2012. And so I'm working on the new edition of that book, which I hope to come out probably early 2021.
Very good.
because you know how publishers are. It takes a while. It takes a while.
Well, Maura, I think that's that's all the questions I have. I mean, this has been great, and I think very educational for, my audience is mostly New York, white collar parents, so that's just a total combination of busy, busy, busy.
For
busy
sure.
and distracted.
Yeah, and being able to control your attention is so important for parents because kids totally get it when you're not paying attention to them. Kids totally get it when you're phoning it in, right? They get it, and that matters.
Cool. Well, good luck with continuing the launch, and thank you so much for jumping on and talking to us. And hang on tight while we sign off and say goodbye to our guests. All right.
Sounds great. Thank you.
Thank you, Maura.